Good morning, everyone. I'm Nico Botha. I'm a software engineer at Entelect, and I'm going to be speaking to you about habit-driven design.
Again? What was your question?
So what can you expect from this talk? First, we'll have a quick look at products that have created habits successfully amongst its users. Then we'll have a quick look at what constitutes a habit and what are the different components of a habit and how are habits formed. Then we'll have a look at what does the experts say, what is the current, I wouldn't say research, but the current knowledge in the field. And then we'll look at why this is not as easy as it seems. So, wrong way, sorry. Undoubtedly, technology has changed our behavior on a day-to-day basis. I mean, we don't use maps. We don't use a roadmap anymore to get from point A to point B. We use Google Maps. We use platforms like Facebook and Twitter to connect with our peers. So there's been a big change recently about people behaving differently due to the influence of technology. But the question is, can you intentionally drive certain behavior amongst your users by developing a product in a certain way? Well, the answer is the biggest social media platforms in the world got it wrong. They haven't been able to do it. So earlier this year, Mark Zuckerberg admitted that Facebook is broken, and it's his goal for this year to fix it. That was before the whole data scandal erupted. And I don't think Twitter has aimed to become the main platform for racial controversies. Every time a person wants to give his opinion, which is controversial, they take to Twitter. So they got it wrong, and that should be an indication that it is not as simple as some people say it is. Right, so how exactly does habits work? According to Charles Duke in his book, The Power of Habit, a habit consists of three components. There's a cue, something that you receive that you either see or hear. Then the way you respond to that cue is the routine, and then afterwards you are rewarded. So say for instance you see a beautiful sunset. That's the cue. The routine is you take a picture of it and upload it to Facebook or Twitter or whatever social media platform you want to use. And your reward is some likes or shares or retweets or whatever you want. So a habit is formed when you repeat this loop enough times so that after a while your brain starts craving the reward before the routine is formed. Whenever you get the cue, your brain starts craving the reward, and then you automatically execute the routine. So as a side note, if you want to change a habit, figure out what the cue is, what the reward is, and change the routine in between. Keep the cue and keep the reward the same, change the routine in the middle. So that's how habits work. And thankfully, this is one field that doesn't have a shortage of experts. If you go into Google or Udemy, you see hundreds of people boasting themselves as experts. They've got a model or framework or a set of steps, which you heard in Marcus' talk. Do not believe any person that says they have 3 steps to accomplish X or Y. Right, so not every person that has a model or a framework is an expert. But there is some popular frameworks in this field, and I want to discuss 2 of them. So the one is of Yu-Kai Chow. He's more in the gamification space, and he's got this octalysis framework, which is basically 8 principles which dictates user behavior. So according to him, if you want to build a product that drives certain behavior, you've got to include stuff like meaning, accomplishment, empowerment, all these 8 principles. And depending on what you're trying to accomplish, include more or less of these 8 principles. It's pretty interesting. You can go and check it out on his site. I think it's yukaichow.com. There's also like an interactive tool where you can play around and see if you put more ownership into this and less meaning, more social influence, then what kind of result you might get. Next model is the hook model by Near AL. It's kind of like the habit loop, just with a twist. So there's also a trigger, an action, a reward, and he's added a fourth part, which is the investment, which you have to do to keep users coming back and keep them using your product. So all of these models are pretty good, but in reality, it's only a starting point. So causality is relative. Correlation does not necessarily imply causality. For instance, in the near future, Instagram might experience a spike in the people signing up for their platform. And their devs might think, wow, it's this list of new features that we've put in. But actually, it's people just leaving Facebook because of the data scandal. And all of their features, though very good, are not necessarily influencing people in the way they thought it would be. And next thing is that there's no one-size-fits-all blueprint for designing habit formation products. Every user base is different, and every app is different in its objectives it wants to accomplish. And third point, it's easy to be perceived as an expert. I'm not saying that nobody knows anything about this field, but the fact that you have a model or a set of steps does not make you an expert. So what is my point? I didn't come here to tell you that all knowledge is bad and do not believe any behavioral psychology that you read or see. The point is, don't believe everything the experts tell you. There is some valuable stuff, but in reality, every product is different and every user is different. The best chance you have at creating a successful product is to do your own research and not take some model and make some predictions based on that. Continuous feedback is your most important asset. That's the only way you'll know if your product is actually being perceived by the users the way you want it to be perceived. And that's also how you'll know that how the users are actually using your product. You might anticipate them using it in a certain way, and it ends up like they use it for an entirely different reason. Base design decisions on real data and not shaky predictions. In the end, the data you gather is the golden source of truth. So basing your decisions off of that will help you to make more influential decisions in the future. And then UX is a good starting point, because you at least want to keep your users engaged for a little while to gain some insight into how they're using your product. And only then can you start influencing their habits the way you want. Right, and that's my story. Thank you very much. So now that you've seen that in the previous talk how Raspberry Pi works, I've got an awesome Raspberry Pi to give out for a question. Okay, sorry, you can ask a question. Yeah.
So you're saying that Mark Zuckerberg has agreed that Facebook is broken to a certain extent.
Yeah.
Which yes, I can agree with in part of their data, how they structure their data. But would you agree with me that their business model as a whole, while building habits has been a success, in terms of whoever has Facebook, who goes on there, and it's basically, I can speak for everyone, it's your newspaper on the toilet. Basically what you're doing. So, and you're looking for that feedback, like you say, that reward, the like, and I'd say society in itself has now become dependent on that reward. Do you agree with me?
Yes, I agree with you. I think they succeeded in creating some habits, definitely. But whether that habit was created intentionally is a different question. I don't think he intentionally created a platform to be used for election rigging or data scraping. If that answers your question. Okay, cool.
One of the things you were saying is continuous feedback
Yeah.
is important. Now, I know some of the projects we've done, we actually track what people use, and that's our continuous feedback. So
Yes.
we see which features are being used and which aren't, and allow us to focus. On your side, what would you say is the best way of getting continuous feedback from people using systems?
Well, that's actually an entire topic and research field on its own.
If you had to choose one item that you'd say, this is it for us.
Well, you can always, I don't want to say mine your logs. That might be a questionable practice, but yeah, track all the movements throughout the system that a user engages into. So random clicks. For instance, if a person clicks on a back button too many times, you might think that the original button took him to the wrong place. That's why it's going back all the time. So then move the button to a different place. So tracking the user interactions on the system, if that answers your question.
Building these habits, what factor do you think repetition has to do with that? Because I mean, if we look at something like Google Maps, how do you zoom a map?
Yeah.
You pitch. And that the repetition of that action drives the habits.
Yes.
So now you go to a photo and you'll automatically pinch to, or expand to zoom in and out.
Yes.
So building those habits with repetition.
No, well, repetition is the core of habit building. So you've got the loop, but you have to repeat that loop a number of times for the habit to be formed. It's only after that loop has been repeated X amount of times where your brain makes that connection between the cue and the reward, and the routine becomes automatic. Yeah.
On the last slide, you say you use real data instead of predictions.
Yeah.
Instead of real data, not predictions. So what do you say about the opposite of data mining? Because I saw does that complement that or goes against that?
Well, there's a
Prediction based on the
yeah.
data over time.
There's a ethical debate around data mining. So depending on what reasons you're mining the data for, I'd say that's a good idea, but don't do it like Facebook and mine data to rig an election. That's questionable. Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
So off the bat, you said they didn't achieve what they set out to do.
Yeah.
Facebook might have created the space, but that wasn't the intention. My question to you is, can you really control what users get out of your traffic, especially one that you open up to the public? Because there's this whole idea of no matter what you put out, different people will interpret it differently based on their social context. So is it actually possible to build something and core belief that this is how people actually
Meaning that can you control the content that people put on Facebook?
or just how they can use your platform, especially when you're sort of creating a sandbox where people sort of like interact.
Yeah, you can definitely control the. It's difficult to control the usage of your product. It's easier to control the content. But also controlling the content is questionable because it's supposed to be an open space where big media companies does not necessarily have an influence. But you can have certain policies in place, which I think Facebook has sort of done now only after the scandal. So to have some policies in place as to what people are actually allowed to post, or the content they can create. All right. Okay, so question, what is one way, the first person to answer can have the Raspberry Pi. So one way that you can test the acceptance of a new feature in your system. Okay, that's correct. You can meet me afterwards. Thank you, everyone.